Doctor Who Season by Season. Season 3 Review. Season 3 of Doctor Who ran from late 1965 to mid-1966 for an amazing grand total of 45 episodes. It was the third season to star William Hartnell as the first Doctor, and while the season begins with the newly established companion team of Stephen and Vicky, as played by Peter Purves and Maureen O'Brien, with the show still being produced by original producer Verity Lambert, everything would change during the third season. Season 3 would be the most tumultuous season of the show thus far behind the scenes, and everything was certainly not rosy. Sadly, Season 3 is also by far the most affected of the Hartnell era in terms of the notorious archive purge, with less than half the season's episodes remaining and just 3 full stories surviving. The season begins with Galaxy 4, a 4-part story from writer William Mims. Although fandom long posited this story as a sort of morality tale in which we're all shocked to find the beautiful Drahvins are evil and the ugly Rills good, it's not really like that, not least since it's clear almost immediately that the Drahvins are a bunch of ice-cold bitches with fridges between their legs. This story was completely missing from the BBC archives until 2011, when Episode 3 was discovered, along with Episode 2 of the Patrick Troughton story The Underwater Menace. The episode was subsequently released on DVD with a cut-down reconstruction of the other missing episodes as a bonus feature on the special edition re-release of The Aztecs, thus forcing many fans to buy a DVD they'd already bought once and one which actually had a worse transfer and picture quality of the story than the original release. Based on Episode 3 and the recon as a whole, Galaxy 4 looks like an unremarkable but inoffensive and enjoyable enough story, with the highly promising new-look TARDIS crew in good form, a fine guest villainous and solid enough production values. The next story is Mission to the Unknown. Mission to the Unknown is unique in the history of Doctor Who. Not only is the story just 1 episode long, which alone makes it unique for the classic series bar the feature-length anniversary special The Five Doctors, but it doesn't even feature the Doctor or any of the regular characters, focusing instead on a special agent in the future who discovers a Dalek plan to invade the entire universe. The episode, written by Terry Nation, is a prequel to another story later in the season. Sadly, Mission to the Unknown is missing from the BBC archives, although there is an excellent animation of it commissioned by Yuba Fanny and Levine which is available on YouTube and many other such video sites and is well worth checking out. Frankly, I can't understand why it isn't available on DVD other than the BBC's bias against anything to do with Ian Levine, of course. The episode itself seems good and solid and menacing. Sadly, Mission is also the very last story and episode to be produced by Verity Lambert. Her departure not only marks the end of an era, but also the point at which the Hartnell era begins to start to fall apart behind the scenes. The next story is The Mythmakers. This comic historical is written by Donald Cotton and is the first to be produced by new producer John Wiles. Unfortunately, John Wiles gets my vote as the most clueless Doctor Who producer of the classic series, the Stephen Moffat of his day, essentially. The Mythmakers seems fairly well regarded by fandom, at least as far as historicals go, but based on the Who Recons animation I have to admit I don't like it at all. In fact, I found it as boring as all hell and about as funny as a root canal. The story is also marred by John Wiles making his first catastrophic and stupid decision, and one which essentially not only began his tenure under a cloud but also doomed his working relationship with his leading man from day one. Namely, Wiles decided to begin his producership by axing Vicky, effectively firing Maureen O'Brien for no apparent reason. And the actress wasn't the only one understandably upset. William Hartnell himself was absolutely fucking furious with the decision. The actor had already been upset by the departures of William Russell and Jacqueline Hill the previous season, and by the exit of Verity Lambert, the woman who had cast him in the role and who he trusted and respected a great deal. But for O'Brien, who he enjoyed working with enormously and who had proven herself capable of soothing the leading man's nerves and frayed temper when the crippling filming schedule started to get on top of him, to be unceremoniously dismissed from the series when she didn't want to go, and by an upstart newcomer to boot, seriously pissed old Bill off. Hartnell was livid, and the working relationship with his new producer was basically fucked from day one as a result, with major consequences for both of them. In another show of cluelessness, Wiles then made a minor character in the story. A Trojan handmaiden called Katarina, played by Adrienne Hill, joined the TARDIS at the end in a rushed effort to replace the actress he'd fired for no fucking good reason, but who did not last long herself. The next story is the Daleks' Master Plan. This is an epic 12-part story, part written by Terry Nation and part written by Dennis Spooner, which follows on from the plot thread introduced in Mission to the Unknown. Sadly, just 3 of the 12 episodes exist in the BBC archives, though from the Hurricanes animation I think the story may be more than a little overrated and not quite the great, all-conquering classic some fans think it is. It certainly starts off well, and the first 3 or 4 episodes are quite dark and gripping, but once the Doctor fucks off with the Terranium core, a vital ingredient to the deadly super weapon the Daleks are intending to use to take over the universe, and they start chasing him through time and space to get it back, it basically turns into a less amusing and entertaining remake of the chase from the season before, and one that doesn't have Ian, Barbara and Vicky in it either. The Daleks' Master Plan is also notable for featuring the first 2 appearance of Nicholas Courtney. Courtney is of course one of the most famous and beloved of all Doctor Who actors for playing Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, a character he played on and off for over 40 years in the classic series, video spin-offs, Big Finish and lastly in the Sarah Jane Adventures in 2009. Of course Courtney is not playing Alistair here, as that character would not be introduced until the Troughton story The Web of Fear 2 years later, but instead plays Space Security Agent Brett Vian. Bizarrely, Katarina, introduced just in the previous story, was unceremoniously dumped just a few episodes into this story as the new companion, with Wiles suddenly deciding a historical companion would be too difficult to write for in yet another display of ferocious cluelessness. The Daleks' Master Plan may be loved by fans, but the lead actor wasn't so pleased, as his relationship with new producer John Wiles continued to deteriorate. The actor was less than keen on the very dark tone of the story, and in particular the number of deaths, particularly of sympathetic pseudo-companion characters such as first Katarina, then Brett Vian, and eventually Sarah Kingdom, played by Jean Marsh, who also played Joanna in The Crusade the year before and Morgan in the Sylvester McCoy story Battlefield. Kingdom was another space security agent who was initially against the Doctor, only to realize she had been lied to and used by her corrupt superiors and change sides. She effectively fulfills the role of female companion in the story after the death of Katarina, only to then be killed herself in the final episode in a rather graphic fashion. The next story is The Massacre. If the lead actor thought the previous story was rather too grim and dark, it doesn't take much to guess he wasn't too keen on this one either. A dark historical story, The Massacre, a 4-parter that yet again has no episodes left in the archives, sees the Doctor leave Stephen on his own in a historical Paris, while Stephen gets involved in local religious politics and is utterly oblivious to a rather obscure historical tragedy that is about to unfold. The Hurricanes animation makes it clear that the story is well acted, and the telesnaps indicate a quality production, as is almost always the case with historical stories, but the fan hype of this story isn't quite lived up to by what I saw. The Massacre certainly isn't a bad story, but there's a rather curious pointlessness to it all. John Wiles appears to be trying to sideline the lead actor and character by having the Doctor absent for half the story, and not doing very much in the other 2 episodes, and the gimmick of Hartnell also playing the Abbot of Amboise is both bizarre, with the double subplot seeming rather out of place amid the dark historical realism, and doesn't really have much impact on the plot either. leading you to kind of wonder, so what the fuck was the point of all that then? The Massacre also continues Wiles's cluelessness in regards to companions, with Anne Chaplet, a servant girl character in the story, being initially lined up to be the new female companion, only for Wiles to have another change of heart and decide she'd be just as problematic as Katarina to write for, and instead introduce a modern-day London character in a tagged-on scene at the end of the story. The character introduced is, of course, Dodo Chaplet, played by Jackie Lane, and the rushed and ill-thought-through nature of her introduction pretty much sums up everything else about the character too. Make no mistake, Dodo is the worst companion of the 60s and one of the worst of all time. She has no character other than chirpy and irritating, and the actress lacks the ability to make something out of anything, let alone nothing. She's terrible, and the choice to make her a regular only makes Wiles's decision to axe the wonderful Vicky at the start of the season look even more like the act of a complete and total fucktard. The next story is The Ark. This 4-part story is the first story of the season to exist in its entirety in the BBC archives, though this is rather cold comfort when you actually sit down and watch it. The Ark has some interesting sci-fi ideas, and gains most of its kudos from a neat twist midway through that sees the story seemingly resolved and the Doctor and company leave in the TARDIS, only to rematerialize in the same place thousands of years later, only to find things have gone to hell in a handbasket, partly because of their previous actions. This is a cool notion, no doubt about it, but the story is so ham-fisted and so boring it's difficult to give too much of a crap, to be honest. Dodo is embarrassingly bad in this too. The Ark is also, mercifully, the last story to be produced by John Wiles. The stress of working on the show when he didn't like it, quite obviously, didn't understand it, quite obviously, and had immediately pissed off the lead actor so much that the set was a virtual war zone, led him to quit mid-season. Sadly, the war between Hartnell and Wiles had also led to the lead actor becoming increasingly difficult to work with for others as well, and in many ways, although Hartnell got on slightly better with the next producer, it began to mark the beginning of the end for the first Doctor. To be continued.